What is up YouTube, and welcome back to another episode of KSP 2 Season 1. So for this episode we are going to do the primary quest you can see there at the top, the Minmus Monument. However, before I go there and do that, I would like to get some satellites in place to make sure I don't lose signal. So with the mod installed, and that is the Communications Extended mod installed, and it does have the, I can't remember what the word is, I can never say it anyway, but basically the planets do block the signal. So if you try landing on the dark side of a planet, you won't have communications. Now if you do have a astronaut, of course, that doesn't matter, because if you've got a pilot, you can still continue to manage the vessel. However, these are all going to be satellites, and satellites don't have pilots, they have drone cores. So I've just threw together a simple one. It is a little bit overkill, I appreciate that. It obviously, again, as I mentioned previously, this mode is only science, it's not career, there's no money involved, so you can over engineer everything, and so I do. So in the beginning of orbit now, just having to circularize where we're at, and then from there I'll push it out. Now I want this to be pretty far out, not quite geosynchronous orbit, which is like 2 million meters. I think 500 to 800,000 meters is enough to give us a good signal. We do have polar orbits already on this planet, and I'm pretty sure we have one on the moon too. So along with polar orbits and a eccentric orbit, or a 90-degree orbit, you should easily get a decent signal pinging around the planets. Scratch what I said about not being geosynchronous. I am going to do that because it is a secondary quest, you can see there, and that distance is 2.863 million meters. Anyway, it's big. Now for those of you that don't know, geosynchronous orbit in relative terms is an orbit that matches the planet itself, the body. So once you are at a stable geosynchronous orbit, and obviously it's very difficult to get it exact, but it's doable. And effectively what happens is you then stay in exactly the same space relative to the planet. So you put a satellite above your house at a geosynchronous orbit, and as the planet turns, the satellite goes with you. Basically the speed of the satellite is the same speed as the planet is turning, and you stay there all the time. It's very good to do communications with a geosynchronous orbit. I think usually the best way to set it up, and the way that it's done in the real world, is you do a triangle so that you have 3 satellites all separated equally on a geosynchronous orbit, and therefore you have then a full lock around the entire planet to have a permanent signal regardless of where anybody is or are at. Almost there now, pushing along with the monopropellant. Very efficient in space, as we know. And slowing down, and there we go. So that is free science, as well as another quest, but also a satellite that is now relatively permanent. I mean, the solar panels on that should keep it going easily. Massive battery core in there to give it plenty of oomph as well. Orientate the ship to try and keep it so it's always facing at least one of the solar panels at the sun. As you can see, as it goes around there, fast forwarding, we are staying in line with the planet. The planet's not turning ahead of us or behind us. We just stay above exactly the same location relative on the planet. Jumping over to one of my old probe cores that I used for a mission. It doesn't, however, have any relays on it. Those antennae you can see are just receivers. It has no relays, and it has no orbital capability in scanning. So I am going to deorbit it, let it burn up in the atmosphere, and basically can it. It's useless to me, and it's just clogging up my tracking station. So we'll burn it up, no problem. that's how we clean up. Just to keep you up to speed, I was wrong when I said about the satellites I'd already done on the moon and such. Apologies for that. Got ahead of myself, and this is what we're doing now. As you can see, the most powerful relay I own is this one. I think it's 50 gigameters. So basically, I think it's 50 billion meters. So more than enough for sort of the foreseeable out to Duna, etc., and probably even past to Eve. I realised I've got the fairings as well, and having that on the top of there, the satellite facing straight up like that, would be a terrible idea. Whether it would actually generate in game, but in real life, that'd just, yeah, it'd disintegrate. So a little bit of a spike on the top there. It looks awful, but it should work, and we're going to get this over to the moon and then Minmus as well. Not forgetting that we do need to do the quest, which the quest for this episode is the monument on Minmus. But I want to get the infrastructure in, as I said at the beginning. I just got sidetracked with the quest for the geo orbit. We've done that. Now we can do the orbits and satellites on the moon, and hopefully Minmus. I believe I do before the monument. So getting an orbit at the moon, or anybody really, is pretty straightforward, standard practice. We've done it a few times now on this channel, so just jump into that. But once we actually get there, I then need to flip the axis 90 degrees, because of course, although we are putting in a relay, which is a huge relay, which is fantastic, it also has the ability to do an orbital scan. So it wouldn't be prudent of us to just flip by 90 degrees on the axis of the moon, get a polar orbit, and then we have a relay that's in place while also scanning the moon. Now, again, there's no reason to do this. We get a nice photograph of the moon's surface and Kerbin and even Minmus, but it doesn't show any resources or anything because they're not in the game yet. But it will be something that you will need to do moving on when the colonization is put in and the resources are put on the planets. So this is infrastructure that you will use setting up your colonies on various different locations. And a polar orbit, again, helps bounce the signal around a planetary body or moon. And there we go for the final time, a 37 delta V burn, which is a couple of seconds, is all. And we now have the ideal altitude as well. So polar orbit with the exact altitude that is required for the moon. Each planet, depending on its size, is of course different. So we now have it scanning and relaying around the moon. That's 2 down, 1 to go. And with this final little burn here, now on Minmus, exactly the same process as before, flipping it round there to a perfect polar orbit. Checking there below ideal altitude, the minimum altitude being 60, the ideal is 170, and we're about 100 by 180. So we can clean that up, like so, and we have an ideal orbit on Minmus 2. Perfect. We just need to wait. I had a bit of an issue with the power there because I didn't extend the solar panels quick enough. So we could just give it a bit of time to charge up before we then say start scanning. And then basically what we'll have is some imagery coming in from Minmus, the moon, and obviously we've already done Kerbin. Now we can move over to the quest at hand and the purpose of this episode. Okay, so over at Minmus, and it is so dark. I mean, it's dark as space, right? Because it is space and I didn't put lights on properly, but we are coming in for a landing now. Another suicide burn over to the map shortly. There we go. And you can see I have changed my orbit ever so slightly to tilt it up. I'm trying to prepare to land around the same area as what the icon is. Again, it's more, not quite polar. I think it is technically in the polar region, but right on the edge. But also trying to compensate for the planet turning as well. As I've said before, I am not the greatest at this, so I can't really explain how I do it. But you can see, basically, this is how I do it. I fudge it using the node manager to basically take the guesswork out by, if I click a button, where does it move the line, and therefore the centre of impact, and I move that to where I roughly want it, and then I follow the node, and usually you get somewhere. Now this is going to be a bit dark. I am going to brighten up post edit, so although we are landing on the dark side of the planet, you will find that it's a lot brighter for you than me, only because it needs to be watchable, right? Scratch that. Unfortunately, there was nothing I could do, no matter what I tried. If I got the black parts to look nice, the rest of it looked awful. So we did land. It was a bit pants. I've landed on the side, but it is Minmus. Again, you can see it's up there on the mountain. I always seem to land where it's not flat. It's just me all over. So yeah, I walk it or fly it, but this is the monument on Minmus. And one thing that is different between both KSP 1 and 2 is the KSP 2 monuments are humongous. They are quite impressive. So this is it. We are getting a lot of additional science from this. We are also completing the quest. This is significant across the board for us in terms of pushing to that medium rocketry items. Both the landing gears, the medium parachutes, we already have the medium engines and fuel tanks, but in general this now should complete the full setup to make a complete medium sized rocket. And that's just in the nick of time as well, because after this our next stop is Duna. Now I didn't know if I realised it straight away, but you can see these cool little orbs that are glowing, and then the gem that is in the centre. It is actually a humongous giant Kerbal statue with some glowing hair, which is quite cool. And there it is, almost. Not quite the best picture I can get because the sun is in an awkward space. This is, by the way, in a huge crater as well, so it's sort of on the polar edge, followed by a crater, which is making it really difficult to get a decent light here and make a decent thumbnail, which is what I was trying to do. So after this, we complete this quest, and then handing it in will give us a significant amount of science, I believe. I can't remember, we'll see that shortly. But what is certain is that will push us towards the next step. Now I believe the next primary step is the signal, and therefore then the travelling to Duna, which is the closest planet to us. The 2 moons will have been conquered. I could do more with the moons, but as it stands there's no reason to, because there's no resources or anything to collect on them. That is what I would normally do. Now I would probably go for Minmus over the moon to collect resources, just because it's so much easier to land and take off on Minmus due to the atmosphere being so weak. However, if it turns out that that's compensated by the actual amount of resources that they provide, then of course that would change my mind. As you can see there, fantastic, giant, and you can see the size of me compared. This is a giant statue of a very happy Kerbal, praying to whoever he's praying to on the monument of Minmus. And there we are, our tiny little orange souls. I'm trying to get as close as possible so that you can see quite how big it is. Now I did consider landing on it, but I changed my mind because, well, I flew through the hand. Then flying up to our rocket ship, and you saw there that it actually just disappeared. Now this happens a lot. I don't know why. It was stable, it was stationary, it was fine, and then it just comes up with a warning to say the communications have gone, and it vanishes. Now reloading and doing it all again does solve it in most cases. Sometimes you have to do it 2 or 3 times. Of course, I'm not going to show you that, so we'll just go with that. Obviously, I've reloaded, done the same thing. I didn't need to obviously walk to the monument because we've got that, and then just got back in the ship and flew it back home. Plenty of Delta V, just under 2,000 Delta V left in it, and that's more than enough to get out of Minmus's atmosphere, or sphere of influence, because it doesn't have an atmosphere. And it usually takes about, I think, 900 Delta V to do so. But yeah, with that done, let's get back home. and straight into the research and development tree with 1361. Level 1 is fully complete. Level 2 is looking good. Heavy landing is done there, and that's what I've been trying to do all of this time. We now have the medium-sized ladders, parachute, and landing gear, which is massive. It'll make it a lot easier to land on dodgy terrain. The bigger the spread of the landing gear, the better that will work. A few other things we can learn here. Nothing I'm aiming for specifically because, well, I don't know what parts are in here. I'm using it as a sort of a lucky bag for the first time, I guess. But as you can see, I'm going to use most of, if not all of, these points and get us over now to where we can go. Tracking station, just to make sure any of our debris is cleaned up. That we have the LSA Minmus polar satellite, we have the NSA Mon polar satellite, we have a polar satellite on Kerbin, and we have a geosynchronous orbit on Kerbin. So you can see Kerbin pictures coming in nicely there. The moon is also nearly complete, and Minmus isn't looking too bad either. That's because of all the fast forwarding from the travelling for the actual the monument. But that's going to do it for this episode. A little bit shorter than normal, but we'll do Duna in the next one. So thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please click like, and any comments are welcome. As always, subscribe for more. Take care. Goodbye.